ecológica. Entonces, son ejemplos en los cuales se puede visualizar la importancia de mantener los servicios ecosistémicos a través de las áreas naturales protegidas. Creo que eso sería todo. ¿Tienen alguna duda o...?
And we just have one last slide, actually, that was going to show. We're trying to get into this discussion, and I won't take too much time on it because we're anxious to hear questions. But I will point out that in the U.S., we have our federal agencies are extremely motivated to incorporate ecosystem service values into planning and decision making. And you know, maybe it doesn't surprise you that we're real in awe of TNC and Ramsar and Conservation International. You guys are doing so many things. You seem like you have so many resources. You're working all over the world. And you know, the government scientists and agencies are kind of plodding along and trying to catch up, it seems like sometimes. We are developing tools. We are under a lot of direction to include ecosystem service values in decisions, but our science branches are trying to figure out how to do that right now. And so we've called on a lot of people to help us, and we're interacting internationally a lot. The International Journal of Wilderness, which the Wild Foundation is the primary nonprofit that manages, supports that journal. If you're not familiar with it, it's one through subscription is available online or hard copy. And the December 2012 issue is one that we've tried to address some of the science issues that we're looking at in the U.S. right now and with our North American partners. And I won't go through all those papers, but there's probably 6 or 8, something like that in that issue. But I want to show you a couple of examples of things that we're struggling with and working with right now. And things like spatial subsidy values. You know, I sat through this session. I also came to the 1 at 11 that was in this room today about applying ecosystem service values in business decisions. And we're not really throwing out methodologies for estimating these supporting migratory values. And our government is interested in that. We have a paper now that's developed, at least conceptually, how we're going to do that. So we may be talking about pin-tailed ducks that are harvested in the U.S., but they do their nesting, feeding up in Canada in areas that are threatened that should be protected. It may be the Mexican free-tailed bat that's real important to crops in Texas that come live in those wild places across the Rio Bravo there in Mexico. People are asking what we're going to do with those subsidy values, those migratory, supporting migratory values. At least we're conceptualizing how to calculate those values. We feel like it hasn't been addressed at all, and it's not just like downstream values, it's values to people long distances from benefits that are accruing from protected areas. Guidelines to engage indigenous people in ecosystem services. Today in the other session, the business people were talking about it's hard to include them, so they often get overlooked if you can't put monetary dollars on there. We're really looking at behavioral decision theory and choice modeling, and as well as indigenous literature, trying to understand why when you talk to indigenous people and use the word stakeholder, that we've seen even in this session, we saw a lot in that business session today, indigenous people don't like that. They back away from you real quick when you start lumping them with recreation users or sports anglers or motorcycle or bicycle riders. In the U.S., we deal with our tribal communities as sovereign nations, and we're directed under memos from the president to consult with them in various ways, and there's certain protocol, and somehow reducing them to stakeholders doesn't help us any. And that's common terminology in the ecosystem service literature. We also, with indigenous people, just the term ecosystem services separates humans from the environment, and you get immediately shut off. We do have a paper coming out in the April issue about water, and a paper we commissioned with academic indigenous woman to look at particularly provisioning and cultural values, and help explain to the rest of us how we might talk better about those two ecosystem services to indigenous people related to water. So watch for that paper in April. We think it's real important. It's a methodological paper. And the last thing I'll mention is the Wilderness Society. Some of the folks there actually threw out for us something like 6 or 7 principles that they think are real important for ecosystem service valuation when we're looking at public lands. And I will say that theme issue really focuses on application. We don't think that ecosystem service valuation is ecosystem service valuation is ecosystem service valuation. We think that depending on what your application is, you might take a different approach, different methods, use different data. So we're focused on allocation or designation. We're focused on management decisions. We saw some examples today that Emily presented about fire or access. But we're also talking about payments for ecosystem services, and we're talking about, I mentioned priorities for allocation. And there's some others, some transboundary issues that we could talk about today. And we're really trying to sort those things out a little bit. But the Wilderness Society, this article by Joe, I can't even say his last name, Kirklitt, a couple of the things he talked about were estimates being of marginal, not total or average values. As much as we talked today in this session and the other one earlier about the complexity of ecosystem service valuation, he says that really these total values we're throwing up, or average values, are pretty simple compared to the marginal values. You know, if you change the land classification, all of those ecosystem services don't go away, whether it's going to commodities or going to wilderness. But what's the difference? What's that marginal value? And that's going to help us make decisions. That's going to make us useful. So we're very interested in that. And Joe really makes a strong argument in the paper, and we've heard a lot in the other session. They talked a lot about methods this morning, from 11 to 1. But the credibility of ecosystem service values based on revealed preferences rather than stated preference. Now, this is a hard one to take back to my resource economists at the University of Montana that work with me. But we're really looking very closely at the methodologies that our academics are using that's working with us in the federal government to try to figure out. Actually, Joe says stated preferences should be our kind of last, our last approach we would turn to, and really advocating for replacement values and reveal preferences in various ways to come up with those values that are more credible, more accepted by people who aren't economists or don't understand how we're coming up with these values. So I just want to throw that out. I really encourage you to look at that issue of the journal because we're really looking across boundaries and trying to think of some of these science values and where we go next in ecosystem service valuation and how we incorporate that into particularly wilderness and protected area planning, allocation, and management around the world. And so we look forward to continuing that discussion if you're a reader of this journal and interested in engaging. So with that, we really open it up to questions for any of the speakers. Everyone's still here, and I know we've gone a little bit longer than we hoped to, but let's get some discussion.
Hello, Alejandro Humberto from GIZ in Mexico. I have a question to the presentation of the U.S. Forest Service regarding the mapping and the modeling. It was all, well, it's a bit of a question and perhaps a comment or criticism related to that. It was all ringing a bell for me in terms of the variables you were looking at and all the factors included in looking at the state of affairs in the U.S. related to forest and water provision. And then I was a bit astonished to look at that idea of putting giant water coolers as a way to provide or to restore certain ecosystem functions. And that to me sounds awfully unsustainable, because you then create a system which is dependent on a high energy consuming device, which is, for me, it's a bit of a risky endeavor. So I don't know if you could comment on that.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear with that. The project there is, can you hear please? Okay. Yeah, basically the Environmental Protection Agency sets standards on maximum temperature allowed to go in the waterway. So if there are regulated facilities that through industrial process or through cleaning up the water, they want to put hot water back into the stream. As they take cool water out and then they want to put hot water back in. And EPA has said because of the sensitive fish populations, you can't put in water of a certain temperature. So the status quo right now is these facilities are building these huge chilling towers, or they're digging huge pits to put the hot water in there to just cool naturally. But the idea is that we're going, an innovative new technique is to restore the riparian plantings along the stream to naturally shade the waterway. So, so maybe I didn't explain it carefully enough before, but the idea is that through the riparian plantings, it would naturally shade the water and be much cheaper than building the cooling towers, and also lead to have many co-benefits for biodiversity, carbon sequestration. So does that clarify?
Yeah, well, kind of.
So you're...
Because the water chillers are, and they need energy to operate and they need investments to get them going. So that kind of defeats the purpose of ecological restoration based on restoring natural processes.
Yeah, so the idea is you could do either or. You could either do the chilling tower or do the biodiversity, or doing the riparian plantings. And so we're saying this is a great thing to do the riparian plantings rather than building the chilling towers.
So this is an example where the forests or the cities are providing funds to the Forest Service. Is that right, to do those plantings in riparian zones?
What's happening? The Forest Service helped provide small funding at the beginning to get this started, but the idea is that the regulated facility itself would pay private landowners that own land along the river to do the riparian plantings, or to, so that's an example. And after the Forest Service gives some initial funding, then hopefully it can, fund itself.
There's obvious challenges with that. Is the scientists with the federal government, the agencies are asking us how confident are we that this riparian, reforestation is going to accomplish the same thing that the cooling towers is going to. It's like, well, the models, what assumptions are there behind the models? And it's kind of scary. But everyone thinks that, well, there's many other benefits from reforestation than just the cooling. Like you say, there's not the energy consumption and other things involved. But we're being challenged on what methodology would you use to actually compare. And I think in a lot of popular literature, you probably know better than I do, that talk about green versus gray, kind of infrastructure to accomplish our objectives. And the gray may accomplish, one specific objective, in that case the temperature. But the green, we think we can accomplish that temperature as well over a longer, might take us longer to get there, throwing up the cooling towers next year. But there's all these other benefits. So we have to be able to somehow measure and document those other benefits. And then there's no comparison because we're taking so many other things into consideration. That's where we are right now. People are brave enough to go out and do those things. And as scientists, we're trying to really try to catch what those values are that they're, and hopefully over the long term it'll show that was a good decision. Short term, it's hard. The modelers kind of, it's hard to figure out just when they'll accomplish that temperature and what all those other benefits are that we're going to accumulate through reforestation. Okay, anything else?
My name is Jason. I'm with the U.S. Forest Service. I'm a hydrologist. I love to talk about the water. About this ecosystem surfaces, I'm wondering, do we have any consideration about the trade-offs between all the different ecosystem surfaces, for example, carbon and water, in particular, for example, the talk from Mexico. I know in Mexico there are a lot of dry area, like any other countries, about the reforestation. In our literature and forest hydrology, we talk about forests use a lot of water. Majority of the rain really was evaporated back to the atmosphere. So reforestation really going to reduce flow, compared either grassland or natural vegetation. So do we have any consideration about this, especially for certain area, where you have really dry climate? So I have this question: do we have any plan in your reforestation plan or carbon sequestration about this?
Fernando wants to respond to that. Then I'll respond for Forest Service research.
Well, I'm going to try to do it in English because to not use a clear machine. Well, yes, I know when you start a reforestation program, in the beginning, the flow in the surface start to decrease. Is typical, and normally the people say, "Why? What is happening?" No, it depends. You told me that if we make a restoration in the upper part of the basin, you are going to get more water. Suddenly there is no water. Of course, the vegetation is growing and it decreases. But we realize that in a region there are climatic change when you cut all the forest. By example, with Jairi said, we are doing an analysis about what happened in a big region with climate change and deforestation, and we realized that there is a zone in Sierra Madre Oriental where there are change, in fact, because there are no land cover vegetation. So they start decreasing. So in the beginning, the floor they start to decrease, but after that, you are going to get more humidity from the atmosphere. You're going to have different micro weather, microclimates, micro weather, and you're going to start getting more humidity. That it's going to help you to start increase the flow in the surface. Do you understand me? My English was very bad.
Kind of. Yeah, there are always arguments. Okay, the evaporation is going to go somewhere. It's going to run somewhere. I'm not sure really this true. To increase the humidity and then increase the precipitation, locally. It's still, scientifically, still debating about this true, effect. It may increase locally the humidity, but it's going to increase the rain, locally.
I think that maybe we can change the information later, because
I'll just pick up on selectively one keyword you had there was trade-offs. And let me tell you that for the Forest Service, who you and I both work for, we're heavily involved in climate change social vulnerability assessments across the country right now. And that's where we're using ecosystem service valuation. We're trying to understand what kind of adaptation, mitigation are we going to have, not to protect the resource, but to protect the flow of ecosystem services. That's where we're moving towards. There's a lot of things. The final plan, that we plan revision we have is leading us that way. Very different from where we've been in the past. And so we're actually starting off, like I said earlier, you know, we're so in awe of the NGOs that go out and come up with these total values. And we even got some universities in the U.S., the Institute of Ecology at University of Georgia, sent a SWAT team up to a Fish and Wildlife Service area in North Dakota over a weekend or something. They estimated ecoservice values. You know, and we're thinking, how did they do that? You know, how did they decide on what values, what data do they use, what's the application? So we're government, I won't say bureaucrats, we're government scientists trying to make sure that we're making good decisions in the U.S. And where we started our research a couple of years ago was on stakeholders and trade-offs. And what we started talking about, you know, there's lists of provisioning, supporting, cultural, you know, there's lists of values published in many places. We started to think specifically wilderness and protected area. What are those services that we're going to estimate values for? We came up with a potential list of 110. It was, okay, let's go place specific. Let's go to the Frank Church River No Return in wilderness in Idaho. And we reduced that to 33 that we think have relevance there. You know, carbon sequestration's in there, but we're not going to go out and estimate values on all 33 of those right now. Let's figure it out. Let's work with our stakeholders and figure out where are trade-offs happening,